Everyone, thank y'all for joining us today. My name is Gabriel Romero. I'm with Stealth Products. I'm the VP of Sales and Marketing. I've also done some product development too. This is why I'm really excited about our guest today that we have here. It's a gentleman that I've known for some years now. We probably can't go back to, but it's been over 10 years that I believe I saw this gentleman presenting. I think it was PMG, I believe it was, in the UK, and I was totally impressed and taken back and stayed connected with him and been fortunate enough to now be in a position now as a company that we're able to do some things together and looking forward and some education opportunities that we've been working together and doing some stuff. And so we're just excited about the future. But I'd like to introduce what you're seeing here, Bart Van Der Heyden, right? Bart and Bart. So, in looking at your bio, man, I'm impressed with your bio. I'm taken back. Um, I know you as a person, and you come across very humble, and I appreciate that. I love working with people that are easy to work with. Of course, we all do, right? But I feel in this case right here, as I'm reading this, like over 29 years of experience in our industry, and that's great. First of all, I know you personally, and I've spoken with you, and I know you love doing what you do. And so we could say 29 years, that's a long time, but is it really a long time if you love what you do? I feel like it's one of those situations where you get up every day wanting to do something that you love to do. It doesn't seem like work, it seems like that's a passion, right? And I really feel like your career, based off of what I'm seeing here, I get the feeling that there's a lot of passion that's driven you into this. And so I'm excited. If you'd like to kind of introduce yourself a little bit, Bart, and talk a little bit about your family, because that's always critical, right? What's the saying behind every good man? There's a loving family that's helped out and been supportive. And I'm very interested too in reading your bio and going over that you married somebody with some similar conversation. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I know sometimes when you get home, the last thing you want to do is still keep on talking about stuff or hearing stuff. But in your case, you guys kind of are in the same kind of field. But I'm gonna let you kind of take over here and kind of introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Gabe. Thanks. Yeah. I'm a lucky man. That's for sure. I love what I do, and I've been blessed to work with so many cool people all over the world, and I have a fantastic family too. So did you know I met my wife and I, we went to physical therapy school. We went to university together, and then after we graduated, we were always good friends. I graduated in Belgium, in Ghent, beautiful city, medieval city. And then we both went to the same. We were in the same year of therapy, and then I went to Germany to practice children with cerebral palsy, and after that I went to the United States. I was also working in the clinic, and my wife, she went to Switzerland, and before she went to Switzerland, she was working in Australia and French Polynesia, beautiful region. So. And we kind of lost contact, back then we didn't have emails and all that stuff, so it was fax. You still had the fax things going, so we kind of lost contact. And then one of her friends got married, also physio from our year, and then we kind of connected again. And back then my wife was living in Switzerland, and I came skiing a lot, so and then one thing led to the other, and now we're married and we have two boys, 18, and the other one is 20, and they're studying both right now. So so sometimes things happen a bit at random, but it's a fantastic experience.
That's awesome. That's awesome, Bart. I love the background. I love. It's always good to kind of think about that in the how small the world is too, and how some of these things pan out. I'm always interested in hearing how people meet and all that stuff. And I can tell a lot by your character and your passion that you have a very good family, very be proud. I'm sure they're proud too. The thing that's I've always been impressed as far as in our work together and our dealings is, of course, you can see the years of experience in your presenting, and you can also see your passion when it comes to doing assessments. I've had the pleasure to hear you, and you've supported us in sending you or bringing you into some clients that we're trying to get a second opinion or some opinions on, and I really enjoy that. Now, you started in the industry. Well, you actually started your professional profession. If you want to kind of talk a little bit into that and how you got really founded into the industry, because I think it started with some different things, maybe a different path that could have been taken. But how did you actually get into the physiotherapy in our industry when it came to working with special needs and clients?
Yeah. Well, I think it slowly happened. You know, when I worked in Germany, I was working with children with cerebral palsy, and I was always kind of intrigued by the fact that, you know, you were doing treatments as a physio, you were working with developmental techniques, you were trying to stimulate the kid to be as good as possible or to be as functional as possible, and then when the session is done, you the kid back in the wheelchair, and that's it. So that didn't make a lot of sense to me. And we had dystonic clients, kids with very severe dystonia, so abnormal movements. And then we said, well, is there any way we can also look into seating, because seating is pretty much a long-term event. And then we looked a little bit into dynamic seating back in those days already. And back in the 90s, nobody was thinking about dynamics. It was like not done. It was a very static approach. Ergonomic seating was more corrective seating, and especially in Europe. And then there was a movement starting. People that said, well, it didn't make sense to do this, and yeah, that always intrigued me. And then when I was working in the States, there was also the wound care aspect. In Europe, physios, OTs are not involved with wound care programs, and so there I saw people with pressure injuries, and then I started, you know, how is this happening? Looking into that, went on courses, wound care courses, and it was always interesting to me how tissue dies from sitting or laying. I wanted to understand that, and then healing link is then always there, you know, care link is there. And yeah, and then a bit of a coincidence, then all of a sudden I was contacted by somebody. Actually, it was my brother-in-law, who's a civil engineer, and he said, well, this, you know, I was then living in the States, and my sister got married, and with my brother-in-law, right? And he said, well, wouldn't it be nice if you would be a little bit more around, you know, so back home? But he also knew that I liked traveling. Young guy, you know, so I love traveling. And then he got like an advert in the paper and said, well, this could be something for you. And it was an ad for a clinical person for Rovo. You know, back then it was still Rovo. Now it's part of the Purmobile group. And then I was the clinical educator, and then I became director, Europe, Middle East. But before that, I was basically traveling the whole world, because the company wasn't so big at the time, and I was the only one in the international market, so outside of the US. So I was traveling all over the place, and I had a fantastic opportunity also with Bravo to basically do assessments about programs, help distributors. It was a very large role, and it was also a role that allowed me to see the world. I've been to South Africa, Pacific, Asia Pacific, so Pacific Rim. I've been in Australia, New Zealand, and I slowly learned how to present, but also I saw everything, right? From the clients. What is the need for a client in different countries? What is the setting of the client that they are? What is the service provision of the client in those different countries? And then what's the role of the distributor? What is the role of the dealer? And I had the opportunity there to learn this as a young guy at my own pace, and that was fantastic. And I got better at it all the time, slowly but thoroughly. So I was able to really understand how different countries work, what is the regulatory situation, what is the products that are available, how do different healthcare systems work, what is also the habit of different clients, of different therapists on how to do assessments, what are the different techniques, and what is living in that community. And I thought that was really intriguing, and that also helped me to learn. I learned a lot. I still learn a lot. So I learned a lot from how people are working, what is their approach towards seating, what is their approach to client mobility. So I thought it was really interesting. And then I also, and then after a while, you build experience, you get to know the systems, and then you say, well, you try your own things, because I also have my clinic with my wife. So we have a clinic here in Belgium, so physio clinic. And then you start looking at, can we also improve things? Like, can we make assessment better? Can we do a seating assessment better? Can we, for instance, be more effective? Can we have data instead of data from angles, which is difficult for a technician to put into practice for a seating intervention? But could we also have a distance measure, for instance? If we know that the pelvis has a pelvic to thigh angle of 120 degrees, that's very interesting. But it could also be interesting to know if the pelvis has to be 3 or 4 centimeters backwards compared to the hip joint, because then it becomes easier to build, and you can do that perhaps for scoliosis assessment techniques where you assess, and then you can also say, look, the offset of the lateral must be this, or within this range, the height must be like this. You need to build an asymmetry of the pelvic with partway flexible to neutral deformities, and if you refine your technique, it becomes then very easy to also know what the best product should be, because then you look at the functions of products, and that always interests me. Functions of products. What is it? What is a product really doing? So that's always been interested. And then if you're looking at functions, and you see sometimes that you don't have functions, you start thinking like, how can we make something functional, because there is a need for it, and I've always been thinking in that sense and in that direction. Okay. Yep.
That's awesome, Bart. No, hey, I didn't want to interrupt you, because you were dropping some great nuggets of experience there, and honestly, I appreciate it. You did a great job. I didn't have to say anything, because I think that's exactly, in a nutshell, that's the experience that we have in working with you. I mean, just personally, I see the excitement, I see the passion, I see what I really like, Bart, and just speaking freely for myself is I appreciate people that have book knowledge. I appreciate people that are willing to learn with experience too, because there's not everything can be in a book, right? Some of this stuff eventually gets into a book from the experiences, right? So for me, I love looking at things through a color scope instead of black and white, because I think there are some things that are black and white, and we understand that. That just make total sense. But I'm a person that likes to see theories and say, what if? What about? Have we considered this? I think that some of the best practices in life come from that. And so I'm always when I'm around a table of people, I love to hear, of course, the black and white, what's textbook, but I also like to, every once in a while, for somebody to throw some theory, because I think that that's very important in our industry, that we just don't lose sight of that. There could be something that we have been missing. There could be something that somebody sees differently that could make a lot of sense. So for me, I appreciate, in working with you, I've always appreciated the fact that you're willing to listen, and also be able to look at things differently with your experiences. One thing I wanted to talk a little bit more about, you said you have a practice with your wife. So you have a practice with
Yeah.
your wife there. So you are taking home your work, and it never ends until you close your eyes. And sometimes probably you dream about it, I'm assuming.
That, yeah, I like it. If I think about assessment technique, I always bounce it off with the team or with my wife. So am I missing something? Does it make sense? So it's beautiful in that sense. And yeah, I think it's yeah. I don't see it as work. I just love what I'm doing. So and I'm so we have the practice. So my wife is the main there because I'm also traveling a lot of seminars, lectures all over the world. And yeah, I told you about my experience with Rovo, and then afterwards I said, well, I love what I'm doing. I think I know a little bit what's going on in the world, in the seating world and in the mobility world and the wound care world. And I said, well, perhaps now it's time to also start superseding. And superseding is basically me, so me doing seminars, support, R&D work, regulatory work. So I do this worldwide for different companies like yourself, but also for a lot of rehab clinics. A big chunk of my work is actually helping, coaching, and training skilled rehab therapists, being more efficient with their seating techniques, seating assessments, client fittings, and that's a big part of the work I do as well. And then you can always bounce it off again in the clinic. So it's kind of an inspired practice inspires, and I see problems in the field, and then I see like how do we solve it currently, and then I sometimes wonder, is there a better way of doing it? And that's always I'm not afraid of change, so I'm sometimes scary. You get a habit of doing things, and then you tend to stick with that habit, but sometimes it makes sense to take a step back and say, is it still making sense what we do? Can we do it better? Can we be more efficient? And my wife is like that too. So we are always trying to be always to improve. How can we make things more efficient, better for the client? And I think then you're looking at functions of products. Can we improve that? And if you have then the knowledge of biomechanics, ergonomics, what is the specific need of clients in wheelchairs with a certain diagnosis or with a certain condition, and then you can, when you're older, sometimes the puzzle comes together, and then interesting things happen. So.
No, that's good stuff, Bart. I love that, and I think that that's critical. In a lot of the stuff that is what happens in our industry, and the learning, your learning environment. What is your learning environment, right? What are you currently experiencing that's developing you as in your profession? And I think that that's you bring up a lot of those things. I really enjoy finding out all this stuff, and it's stuff that I feel like even though we've gotten to know each other, there's some clarity coming in my life as far as where all your experiences come from. Now, I also think that another thing that's and again in reading your bio and just also just knowing you is kind of how I met you before, like I mentioned with PMG conference. The committees that you've been involved with, associations that you've been involved with too. I think it's speaks a lot to your experience, but also the appreciation that people have with the experience. So I don't know if you want to kind of highlight some of those things and what that's meant to you in your career.
Well, you go to a conference because you want to learn things, and it's fantastic because you interact with your colleagues, and you share knowledge, and you always get an interesting angle on a similar problem that we all had. So I always thought it was really interesting being part of those conferences. And then sometimes I was presenting there, building up. Plus, you presenting there, so I presented at a lot of conferences, and then sometimes you take on a couple of projects. So I think we met at PMG. That's correct, and if I'm not mistaken, it probably was PMG 2010 or so. Then there was this international one. Before, Posture Mobility is basically a conference that is mainly the UK-based conference, and then the idea started of myself and other committee members that it probably would make sense to also start an international one. So expand beyond the UK, work together with other non-UK organizations on seating and positioning. And in 2010, we organized a big one in Scotland, and it was right then there was also this volcanic eruption of a volcano in Iceland, so it was a bit difficult to travel there, but it was well attended. There were 800 people or 850 people, so it was a well attended conference, and I was together with Barent and Dave Long. We were the chair of the committee, and I always said, well, let's be ambitious and let's do something that is quite ambitious. And we said, well, let's get a start, or let's start subcommittees, and let's see if we can work on best practice guidelines. So there were teams, best practice on transportation, pressure imaging. There was also a start of best practice on standing. And tissue preservation, and that was the whole idea of this conference, that we could start with some best practice guidelines, and that was a really absolute blast to do it, because you can actually work with teams and you can invite people that were inspiring me, and hope that they also inspire other people. So that was fun, and then. This happens in other countries too. Like there's in France also a posture and mobility committee. So I'm in the scientific committee, and I'm also and you always enjoyed the European Seating Symposium, and so if I can help there, I'm also there. Was several times part of the scientific committee, and and then it keeps going and it keeps going. It's not something. It just grows organically.
Hey Bart, that brings up something to mind for me that I've noticed different with you from other clinicians. I've of course worked with a lot of clinicians in my career too, and I appreciate that you really like to throw a lot of science and technology in developing and your establishing your profession. I think that that's really critical, because what I know of you through the years, anytime we'd be talking about something, you were always trying to find methods of utilizing new technologies, new abilities, scanning devices, just different things that could help you see deeper. How do you feel personally that as an industry, because you've dealt with international type, but as an industry, we've utilized as much as we can, or have gotten into that, or do you feel like we're still lacking that, we're far behind that? Like there's automotive industry that uses things that I find you're using because it's accessible. You're like, hey, we could use that in our stuff. I find like you're creative enough to find other industries are using technologies that we could incorporate, but and people go to you from universities, and as you've had conversations, at least some of the conversations that we've had. But how do you feel as an industry we're doing in that?
Yeah, I think happens, and you are combining different points of views or different perspectives, and I always felt like there is a lot of interesting things happening in different industries. You know, I'll give you an example. In 2006, I was attending the European Pressure Ulcer Advisory Panel conference, annual conference, and it's a bit perhaps I'm not going to go into too much detail, but before 2006, there were a lot of conferences on support surface and understanding, for instance, why one support surface or one technique for positioning the client was better than another one. And the way to prove it was with clinical studies, clinical trials. And it was always a problem because, tissue injury, pressure ulcers are often systemic disease. So it's intrinsic factors, extrinsic factors, forces on the skin, and then factors relating to the client that are basically causing this. And then in 2006, for instance, there was this Professor Kees Olmens from the University of Eindhoven, and he was a biomedical engineer, and he was looking into cells, and he was basically looking at cells and what happens when cells are being loaded, the actual cell. And then it starts getting interesting, because you know that a cell can die being loaded, the membrane can stretch, basically harm the cell. Then there may be a way to also predict when that will happen, and we call that finite element analysis. And I started looking into this, and there was this man, Dr. Alexander Sievert, and he developed a finite element model, a human model. It's a virtual model that can also look at how tissue will behave when it's being loaded, how much deformation is occurring, how much compressive forces are on the skin, the location, how to analyze this. And he also had a posture model. So it's not just the tissue that he could model, but he could also model posture. And then it gets really interesting. So because if you are combining tissue with posture, then that's the reality. You sit, you lay in bed, there is always a posture, and that posture must have an effect on tissue. And it's really difficult to prove that link between posture and pressure, for instance, with clinical trials, because there's so many variables that can be around. You don't have a homogeneous client group. The client itself may have different extrinsic risk factors, and that leaves sometimes gaps in our practice. And then I think it's then great opportunity. So that was how my work or my relationship with, for instance, Dr. Alexander Sievert started. Then it was really interesting to see how he was dealing with computing postures for different industries, and perhaps we can also do this, use this information for our industry. And then at international city symposium, for instance, we have been presenting on different setups. What happens, for instance, if you select a wheelchair that is too small, the bed is too small or too wide? Will that compress tissues, and how much stability would that give you? What happens if you are adjusting your foot supports too much forward? Would that give a stretch on your hamstrings? And if that hamstring would be stretched, would that have an impact on your pelvis in terms of rotating backwards? And how much would that affect tissue? So we have done several setups that were, that we saw in clinical practice that it would make a difference, but now we could actually prove it. And I think there is a lot of opportunity there. So different ways of looking at problems from an engineering perspective, or from a medical perspective, or I think there's also a huge opportunity, for instance, to bridge the sealing world with the wound care world. I think there is a fantastic opportunity in that sense. So I think it really gets interesting when people from different perspectives are mixing and connecting, and that's always been a really interesting field for me, because that's when new ideas happen, new information starts, and I think it's happening in our industry. So sometimes it's a little bit slow in our industry, but on the other hand, it's not an easy industry to be in because you have funding that is sometimes limited. It's also complex because you have different solutions for different clients. It's not like a one-off solution. But on the other hand, I think we're getting there slowly, and I think if you have a good understanding what the challenges are for a client, and then we link that to how we could solve it, and we have our medical. Everybody who's a clinician has a lot of understanding of the medical condition, the biomechanics, the anatomy, the physiology, and then we have technicians, very skilled technicians who have a really fantastic understanding on adjusting technical expectation of products, how to use them. And then you have the user, who has an experience, and perhaps we can learn from that experience. And if the user has a positive experience and he can be more functional, and we measure these outcomes, that can inspire us new ideas. And I think all the cards are aligned. I think right now we have a lot more knowledge than we used to have. We have a lot more technology, and we are getting more. We are more into best practice, where we can measure things. We ask the client what they like, and if you put all these things together, I think good things will happen. It must happen. Because,
yeah, you're right. You're right, Bart. Bart, a couple things stood out for me in your methodology here: triage and also supporting cast. And I think that's critical for us to always think about. Is the more information we can get, that's supportive information, the better the outcome, and organizing the priorities of what's needed. And I think you're always going to have a good outcome when you think that way, and you're willing to work that way. If it's information that can come to you, take the information in, because it could benefit. It could illuminate something that might have been missing in information that was needed. And again, Bart, I appreciate all this talk and stuff like this. I'd like to end here, if we can, in this thought process of some of the educational programs that you've developed through Superseding. I'm excited. This is not going to be the last time that we're going to actually be talking and meeting, because I feel like there's a lot of things that we need to kind of get more in depth with and talking about when it comes to some of the positioning advice that could be given to families and to clinicians. But if you would like to talk a little bit about some of the educational programs that have been developed by Superseding, it'd be great to hear that.
Over the years, I developed a lot of expertise. Like I said, I work with clients. I've seen a lot of people work with the same problems. And then I developed over the years a whole array of seminars. So, for instance, on managing dystonia, dystonic clients, high tone clients. What should we do? What should we assess for? What are perhaps challenges that we can solve? What would be a good seating intervention for those clients? Tissue integrity. How to manage tissue integrity with seating, 24-hour seating approach, positioning approach. Then I also looked into the specifics of clients. How can we help a client with after CVA, because they have a typical problem? What can we do to help them become more functional? And also with traumatic brain injuries. So, a couple of weeks ago, I was in Austria at a clinic, a rehabilitation clinic in Vienna, and I was training the staff on assessment techniques and seating techniques for after a traumatic brain injury. What can we do with clients with multiple sclerosis, ALS? So I have developed a whole array of trainings for different type of client populations, but also the specifics then. For instance, how can we manage posture with secondary position? How can we do that? And how do we do an evidence-based approach for making clinical decision making for our therapy? And so I've developed all these programs for this. How can we also work on tissue integrity in seating, but also in supine position, or when people are laying in bed? And I always try to have, even if it is a different topic, I always try to have a structure in it. And I will first go into the specifics of each topic. You know, what kind of information is important for us in order to solve a problem. And for instance, it's different, the information we need for clients with suffering from a traumatic brain injury as opposed to clients with CVA. So that brain, that knowledge, that brain, I call that brain, the knowledge, background information. You know, I start by giving a condensed overview on what is really interesting to know. And then the next thing is, of course, everybody's an individual, so you can never make a general assumption. Next thing is, you need to go into the specifics of the client, and the specific of the client is basically the assessment. How do we do a proper assessment for these type of client populations? And once we have once we have the specifics of those clients, then we can start realizing something. We can start with therapy. We can start with for instance, seating interventions. We can do something, and then of course you never know if it was successful, and then you need to track. So tracking is measuring your outcomes, and that will inform if that whole process is working. So Gabe, if you say brain, first letter is B, assessment, first letter is A, building something or realization, R, so that's an R, and then track or measure your outcomes, that's a T. So Bart, right, I call that the Bart thing.
Makes total sense to me. I love it, Bart. That's great. That's great. That's great. That's a good way. I always remember that too. And again, I'm looking forward to many more of these one-on-one sessions. We got some exciting things that we've got in store. And again, I've appreciated the friendship first of all, and also the professional side of getting to know you. Again, I look forward to what comes of this, and there's some great things in store, and the things that we've already worked on. I always hear great things from our team. It takes a village, as we know, more than ever in this industry, to supporting cast and everything. So I do appreciate the time that you've given, Bart, in this interview, this first introduction interview. Again, I look forward to many more of these and more specific topics that we'll be working on. But I do appreciate everything, and I look forward to sharing more of these experiences with you in the future. So thanks, Bart.